Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The night had come, the one night each year when magic hummed so strongly in the air that it felt like the very castle walls pulsed with life. The magic ball was always an event of grandeur, but this year's sun was different. This year, the whispers had turned into something more, a rumor or perhaps a prophecy that the wish crystal, a legendary artifact said to grant a single all-powerful wish, would reveal itself. It was enough to bring everyone who mattered, from noble families to underground factions, all gathered in secret plots and alliances. Enchanting adjusted the cuffs of his formal robe, eyeing the entrance to the ballroom with both excitement and unease. He wasn't here for the festivities. As a mage sworn to protect powerful magical artifacts, he and his two companions, Lingerie and Enchanting, had been tasked with safeguarding the crystal should it appear. The stakes had never been higher. Mimi eyed her fingers dancing nervously over the brim of her cloak, leaned towards Zahla. You sense it too, don't you? The tension. It sounds like everyone knows. Sadang nodded, his eyes scanning the room. The ballroom was filled with glittering gowns and finely tailored suits, but behind the facade of civility, magic crackled like lightning, waiting to strike. He noticed Lord Ben, the head of one of the most powerful noble families, his piercing gaze darting towards Zong every so often. Then there was Master Yuan, elder mage whom Sawang had long admired, standing near the scholars' delegation. Wu offered a polite nod, but something in his expression seemed darker tonight. Xiang Biaoi, ever the pragmatic rogue, saddled up to them. This many people under one roof, all gunning for the same thing. I don't feel like it. Feels like we're rewalking into a lion's den. I know, Sang agreed, but we have a job to do. The trio stepped into the ballroom, trying their best to blend in. The vaulted ceiling sparkled with enchanted chandeliers casting shimmering light over the swirling crowd. Music played softly in the background, its haunting melody a perfect match for the night's sense of mystery. It wasn't long before the first hints of danger made themselves known. The arrival of the faction. Sayang could feel the eyes on him. Everyone knew about the crystal, even if they pretended otherwise. The Shadow Guild had slipped in almost unnoticed. Their members cloaked in deep purples and blacks, slithering through the crowd like serpents. They were known for their proficiency in dark magic, and Sawang had heard the rumors if anyone could twist the crystal, swish for sinister purposes, it would be them. The House of them, however, made no effort to conceal their ambition. Lord Vannon stood proudly in the center of his group, his silvered hair and regal bearing giving him the look of a monarch. They had always collected powerful artifacts, and the crystal would no doubt end up locked away in one of their vaults, never to be seen again, should they acquire it. Mia's gaze shifted uneasily and back here. The crystal doesn't just grant any wish. It takes something in return. No one ever mentions that part in the legend. Sohang nodded thoughtfully. No wish comes without a cost. As the night wore on, Sohang felt a growing restlessness. The dance had yet to begin. The grand event that was rumored to trigger the appearance of the crystal. As if on cue, a gong sounded, signaling the start of the magical dance. All eyes turned to the center of the ballroom. The dance of magic. The ballroom floor cleared and pairs of dancers glide into play. Xiang couldn't help but admire the beauty of the scene. Magic weaved through the air like threads of gold, tracing the movements of the dancers, forming delicate patterns that shimmered with power. The air became thick with anticipation, every breath heavy with the possibility of what might come next. Then it happened. A soft glow began to emanate from the very center of the room. At first, it was barely noticeable, just a flicker of light amidst the twirling dancer. But as the glow intensified, the dancers paused, all eyes turning toward the sword. From the floor of the ballroom, as if called by the very magic of the dance, the wish crystal began to rise. It shimmered with a soft blue light pulsating in time with the rhythm of the music. Simershinda's heart raced. There it is, he whispered to Lagmia. She clenched her fists, her magical energy already crackling at her fingertips. We need to move now. Before they could take another step, a figure lunged from the shadow. A member of the Shadow Guild made the first move, darting toward the crystal with unnatural speed. Zangin was quicker. With a flick of his wrist, he summoned a barrier of light, forcing the attacker back. The ballroom erupted into chaos and betrayal. Guests, who had moments ago been enjoying the festivities were now revealing their true intention. Members of the Shadow Guild, the House of En, and other unknown factions clashed in a sudden explosion of magical energy. Flames, ice, and bolts of lightning flew across the room, and the once beautiful ballroom became a battlefield. Zofengalimiyai and Chenzai fought their way toward the crystal. Yumiyai's defensive spells were a lifesaver deflecting incoming attacks, while Chenzasi used his agility to dart through the crowd, neutralizing threats before they could get too close. Sal focused on maintaining a protective shield around the crystal, but it was clear that they were outnumbered. Then came the betrayal. Sodang's heart sank as Master Yu stepped forward, his face dark with determination. Zahanyuvi, always been a good student, but this is beyond you, he said, his voice laced with regret. The crystal belongs to me. Before men could react, we unleashed a powerful spell that shattered Zorangasan's protective shield, sending him and his companions flying back. Wal stepped forward, his hand reaching for the crystal, his eyes filled with a desperate longing. Master No Van shouted, scrambling to his feet. But Ryu's mind was made up. You don't understand, Zalam. This is the only way to bring them back. My family, everything I've been lost, the crystal can make it right. So Sang's eyes narrowed. He had always admired Brutal, but this was something else. Irao had lost his family in a magical accident years ago, and it had haunted him ever since. But to sacrifice everything for a wish, it was too much. Laimi, blood dripping from a cut on her forehead, struggled to her feet beside Zhuang. He's lost it. We have to stop it. The chase through the castle. Why now, holding the crystal, turned and fled. Zoile, Miai, and Chenzahi gave chase, weaving through the still fighting factions as they made their way out of the ballroom and into the winding corridors of the castle. Wei was fast, faster than Zarang had ever seen him move before, and it was clear that the power of the crystal was fueling him. Dante let him get away, Chenzai shouted, sprinting ahead. The castle's corridors were a maze lined with tapestries and enchanted statues that watched their every move. Wu used his knowledge of the castle's layout to his advantage, conjuring traps and obstacles to slow them down. Song and his companions barely dodged a series of fireballs that erupted from the walls, and at one point they found themselves surrounded by an illusion of endless hallways. Can we running out of time? Zhang muttered, his heart pounding in his chest. I closed her eyes, focusing her energy. I can break the illusion, but it'll take a second. Zhang nodded, positioning himself to defend her as she worked her magic. Count. Yadi, ever the opportunist, found a hidden passage that led them deeper into the castle's side bowels, closer to Wu. Finally, they cornered him in a hidden chamber. The walls of the room shimmered with ancient magic, and the air was thick with power. Wu stood at the center, the crystal glowing brightly in his hand. This is it, Wu said, his voice filled with both sorrow and resolve. I can bring them back. I can fix everything. Belsang stepped forward, his heart heavy. But at what cost, the legend's master? The crystal doesn't give without taking. You'll lose something far greater than what you gain. Wu hesitated, his grip on the crystal tightening. Please then pleaded, Dante, do this. The air around them began to crackle as the power of the crystal surged, and Zoran knew they were running out of time. Yu's fingers trembled as the crystal pulsed in his hands, casting an eerie blue light over the hidden chamber. The power emanating from it was palpable, and for a moment Salem could see the temptation flicker across Wu's face, an unbearable longing, the hope of righting all the wrongs, of undoing the tragedy that had haunted him for years. But the Hun could also see the toll it was taking on his former mentor. Ryu's once confident stance was weakening, his shoulders slumping under the weight of the decision he was about to make. He was a man torn between his grief and his reason, and Zoang knew that if he let him use the crystal, the consequences would be devastating. Lena, still catching her breath from their chase, edged closer to Zene. We can let him activate it, she whispered, her voice hoarse. The power could destroy everything. Zolang nodded, his eyes fixed on Wu. I know. He took a deep breath, stepping forward with careful, deliberate movements, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. Master Ria, I understand what you've lost. I can't pretend to know the pain you carry, but this is either way. Yu Ti's gaze flicked to Sang, his expression wavering between desperation and fury. What would you have me do, Sanang? Continue living in this hollow existence, watching every day pass, knowing I failed them. His voice broke, and for the first time, Sanang saw not the powerful mage he had once admired, but a broken man. You taught me that magic isn't about taking the easy way out, Zamang said softly, trying to reach the part of Wu that still believed in something greater than his own sorrow. It's about balance, about the choices we make. You told me once that power without restraint leads to ruin. Wu's grip tightened on the crystal, and the glow grew brighter, almost blinding. I don't care anymore. He spat. I don't care about balance or restraint or the consequences. I just want them back. The chamber began to tremble as the crystal's energy reached a critical point. The air crackled with raw magic, and Zoang felt his own power reacting to the surge. He had to act now, or everything would be lost. Without hesitation, he summoned a protective barrier around himself and his companions, shielding them from the growing storm of energy. Please, Master, Zhang called out over the roar of magic. If you do this, you'll lose yourself. The crystal takes just as much as it gives. You will bring them back, but at what cost? Your soul, your life? Wu hesitated, his eyes wide and frantic, as if he was only now beginning to grasp the gravity of the situation. But the crystal's Sayus power had already taken hold of him, pulling him deeper into its grasp. His face twisted in anguish, and for a brief moment, Zarang thought he might reach him, might convince him to stop. But then in an instant, everything changed. Wu let out a cry of rage and despair, raising the crystal high above his head. I'm sorry, Sarang, he whispered, his voice barely audible over the howling wind of magical energy. I can let them go. Before the Han could react, a blinding flash of light erupted from the crystal, sending shockwaves through the chamber. The ground beneath them cracked, and the walls shimmered with the force of the unleashed magic. Sosingyang's protective barrier held, but just barely. He could feel the immense pressure of the magic pushing against it, threatening to tear through. Wu stood at the center of the chaos, the crystal's energy swirling around him like a vortex. His face was contorted with pain, but his eyes were locked on the swirling magic. It was too late. He was too far gone. Sa Kaheng had no choice. With a surge of determination, he lowered his barrier and sprinted toward Wu, his hands crackling with magic. He had to stop this, had to stop the crystal before it consumed them all. As he closed the distance, he could feel the heat of the magic, the raw energy coursing through the air, but he didn't slow down. He could, in one fluid motion. Zhang reached out and grabbed the crystal from Ya's hands, wrenching it free. The instant his fingers touched it, he felt the overwhelming power surge through him, threatening to overtake his mind. It was as if the crystal was alive, a sentient force seeking to corrupt anything that dared to wield it. But Zhang fought back. He summoned every ounce of willpower he had, focusing on the one truth he knew: no wish was worth the destruction this crystal could bring. He could feel the crystal trying to pull him in, offering him his deepest desires, whispering promises of untold power and fulfillment. But he pushed those thoughts away, his mind clear and focused. With a roar, Song channeled all his magic into the crystal, forcing its power back into itself. The room shook violently, and for a moment, it felt like the entire castle might collapse. But then, as quickly as it had begun, the magic dissipated, and the chamber fell silent. The Sang stood in the center of the room, breathing heavily, the now dormant crystal in his hand. He glanced over at Wu, who had collapsed to the floor, unconscious but alive. The fight was over. Lin Yi and Chenzaki rushed over, their faces etched with relief and exhaustion. You did it, Lin Yi whispered, her voice barely audible. Zhang looked down at the crystal, its once brilliant glow now dim. We did it, he corrected, handing the crystal to Lush Minishi, time for safekeeping. Together they made their way back through the winding corridors of the castle, the weight of the night Shen, events pressing heavily on their shoulders. The ballroom, once full of grandeur and life, was now a scene of devastation. The factions had been defeated, their ambitions thwarted, but Xiaoshang knew that the battle for control of such power would never truly end. As they approached the entrance, Sarang glanced back at Wu, who had been carefully placed on a stretcher by the castle sealer. His mentor would live, but he would never be the same. The crystal had taken something from him, just as it had promised to grant his wish. Whether it was his magic, his soul, or something more profound, Zhang didn't know. But the man he had once admired was gone, replaced by someone who had lost everything in the pursuit of a dream that could never be realized. Outside, the night was calm, the stars twinkling overhead as if the chaos of the ballroom had never happened. Vasanglamimiai and Chen Zierhi stood together, watching as the remaining guests quietly dispersed, their plots and schemes foiled for now. Lemmingai broke the silence first. What do we do with the crystal? Xian looked at the faintly glowing object in her hands, feeling a deep sense of responsibility settle over him. We keep it safe somewhere far from here where no one can find it. Chana Zio smirked, though. His eyes were still filled with weariness. And where exactly is that you know as well as I do there? Sound always someone looking for power like this? Sarang nodded, his expression grave. I know, but we will find a way. They stood there in silence for a moment longer, the weight of their task looming over them. But despite the challenges that lay ahead, Zoang felt a sense of resolve. They had saved the crystal tonight, prevented it from falling into the wrong hand, and as long as they were together, they could face whatever came next. With that, they turned away from the castle, disappearing into the night, knowing that the real challenge was only just beginning.